your attention, please. All right. Welcome, and thank you so much for being here with us tonight and taking some time out of your evening for the third of our 4 Ripple Effects Watershed Forum. My name is Karina Morales. I am a conservation specialist with the Caledonia County Natural Resources Conservation District. We are one of 14 conservation districts in the state of Vermont and one of hundreds throughout the country. And in the state of Vermont, we are quasi-governmental organizations, and we are primarily funded through competitive grants to connect people and resources and organizations to steward our lands and waters for the future. So this series would not be possible without the collaboration of various partners, many of whom are here today. So I'd just like to take a chance and have them go around the room and introduce themselves and just tell us a little bit about their organization. And I guess we can start with Tessa.
Sure. Hi everybody, my name is Tessa Yip. I am the Engagement and Community Support Floodplain Manager with the Vermont DEC, State Department of Environmental Conservation. So I'm on the floodplain management team, so we basically work to help towns and residents be less damaged by flooding and build flood resilience, as well as to help protect the natural benefits of our floodplains and our river corridors across the state. So my role is mainly focused on education and outreach to the public and to our municipal officials. So it's good to be here.
Is it my turn?
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Kristen Leahy. I'm the Planning, Zoning, Floodplain, Resilience Adaptation Coordinator and Administrator for the town of Hardwick. Bring it all together, we'll get something done, right? Welcome. I'm glad to see so many people, and I'm glad to see so many people from different towns, and I'm so thankful for this whole collaboration. We couldn't have done this without all of our partners. Thanks.
And yeah, I think we have some representatives from NVDA if you guys want to introduce yourselves.
Hi, I'm Liam Abate. I'm a transportation and GIS planner with NVDA, and I do a lot of work with town cell mapping, floodplains and river corridors and things like that in their communities.
And I am Molly Doctor. I'm the Regional Emergency Management Coordinator, and I also focus on regional planning in the area. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so a little bit of background for those of you who are here for the first time. This kind of came to be because of Kristen. She approached our conservation district's district manager, Emily Finnegan, who some of you may know, about putting together an event where we could have a public speaker series to address some of the water-related issues that she most often hears about in her role. So together with the partners who just introduced themselves, we're here today for Ripple Effects. And again, if you're joining us for the first time, so far we've covered dredging. We also covered beavers and natural infrastructure. And both of those presentation slides and the HCTV recordings are up on the Town of Hardwick's website, along with some handouts, which we also have some of in the back that Kristen put together up on the website. So thank you, Kristen, for doing that, and thank you to HCTV for recording. And yeah, today we're going to talk about dam removal in rivers. And then next week we have our 4th and final talk, and we will dive into climatology then. So we're really happy that you could be here tonight.
Including drought.
Yeah, good.
That's a good one. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So yeah, glad that you're here today, and hopefully you can make it next week as well. Just a couple of logistics for today. As I mentioned, there's some handouts out back, so feel free to grab some. There's some stickers as well. And then some super yummy snacks, so help yourselves. And then the bathrooms are over here to my left in that first hallway to the left. And yeah, I would love to have them introduce themselves in a little bit more detail, but I'm just really thankful to have Karina Daly here of the Vermont Natural Resources Council and Kasia Ramzo of the Vermont River Conservancy. And I'm just happy that they could be here to share their expertise and their experience. It's going to be really great. We'll have 30 minutes at the end for Q&A, but if you have any brief clarifying questions throughout the presentation, feel free to raise your hand and we'll try to address those as we go. But just save the juicier questions for the end if you can. And yeah, if there are no initial questions, I will pass it over to Karina and Kasha.
To help me, what is your definition of juicy?
Probably all the questions that will be asked.
Okay.
Just want to double check. So yeah, maybe we can have those wait till the end. All right.
All right, so my name is Kasha Ranjo, co-director of Vermont River Conservancy, and really excited that you are all here tonight with so much interest in dams, and I hope a lot of curiosity. Our organization is involved with removing a handful of dams in Montpelier. Full disclosure, we have not ever removed any dams from a river before, but like you, we're working in communities where people are trying to figure out, do we want to take out our dams? How would that happen? What does that look like? And so I can speak to that piece. And Karina, on the other hand, is the expert here.
Hardly an expert, but definitely have a few years into it. I'm Karina Daly. I am the Science and Restoration Director at Vermont Natural Resources Council. And my job is twofold in that position. I manage the dam removal program for Vermont Natural Resources Council, and I chair something called the Vermont Dam Task Force. And I also work on water policy at the state level. So it's really fun to be able to work on the ground, reconnecting rivers and learning about the regulatory process and of these rivers and the conservation strategies, and then be able to apply that at the state level. So with that, I think we can go into our slides.
So tonight we're going to talk about how we get from this to this, trucks in the river, to this with no dam, and why we're headed in that direction. Maybe beginning with the number of dams that we have all over Vermont.
So yeah, first a little pop quiz. Does anyone know how many dams are in Vermont? Curious. No, that's how many.
Just in case it's on the screen.
How many are in Vermont? 300. Close, over 1,000. So the Vermont Dam Inventory, which is run by Dam Safety, has over 1,000 in that inventory. But every day we're finding dams that haven't been inventoried. We call them ghost dams, so dams that haven't been identified that are left in rivers from old mills. So we have tons of old dams. Somehow the slide went backwards.
I did, because I thought the answer was on the screen.
And what's really exciting that Vermont has removed more dams per capita than any other state. So we've been really busy. Especially these past few years, and we've removed 72 dams as of last year. This year we have 7 dam removals going on across the state right now, so that number is going to change to closer to I can't do math. 72 plus 7,
almost 80.
Almost 80. So this is a project put on by the Vermont Dam Task Force, and we also have a website called Free Vermont Rivers, which is not just about dams, but it's also looking at culverts and thinking about our rivers as connected systems. We're thinking about landscapes in connected ways, how organisms can move up and downstream, and how we can have resilience long-term for biodiversity and public safety and well-being. So the Free Vermont Rivers website is part of that.
Is that .com or .org?
.org, yes. And part of that, an initiative that came out of the Vermont Dam Task Force is the Vermont Dam Removal Initiative. And that basically raises awareness. It identifies derelict dams and prioritizes projects and collaborates across the board with organizations to get this work done. We're not trying to remove every dam out there. We're trying to identify those projects and prioritize them and think about which ones really have the most benefit for the communities that they're in and prioritize those projects. And with that, I wanted to share, and there are some handouts of this because I think this is a really helpful graphic about thinking about rivers, because you can't understand how dams work until you understand how rivers function. And rivers exist in 4 dimensions, so they're not a one-dimensional thing. They change over time. The one thing constant about rivers is change, and I know you know this, living in the community you live in. But those dimensions are, there's a lateral dimension, there's a longitudinal dimension, there's a temporal dimension, and there's what's the last one? Vertical, thank you. The vertical dimension. So when we remove a dam or think about our rivers, we need to think about all those dimensions. Lateral dimension is the river accessing its floodplain. So the water moving out and up onto its floodplain and attenuating that storm water by being able to access the floodplain and wetlands that are on the side of the river. The longitudinal dimension is that idea of transport. Rivers move, they move sediment, they move water. We need that connection so that they can transport. That's how rivers move. So when you put a dam in that system, that obviously disrupts that connection. It also disrupts that lateral connection because suddenly you have a dam in that system, so you have a pond behind it. So that pond is filled up with water so that then when there's a storm event, there's nowhere for that water to go. There's no floodplain because the floodplain's underwater. So it also disrupts the vertical connection, which is the connection to groundwater. So our surface water needs our groundwater. Vermont's really known for their cold trout streams. That's what has existed here for thousands of years. And when we disrupt that connection by creating a dam or an impoundment, we are blocking the connection of that groundwater with the surface water to be able to move downstream and keep that river cold, which ultimately impacts Lake Champlain and everything downstream. And then lastly, that temporal connections, that rivers change over time. They're constantly changing, and we need to give them the space to do that. So understanding that the river's not always going to be in the same place, and we have, we've inherited our growth pattern based on those that came before us, and we have to protect that, obviously, and support that. But we also need to understand that where we can and where we have the space, we want to give our river room to move and slow down. And then there's also a handout of this, but this is something called the river continuum concept, and it's just a graphic looking at a side view of a river and thinking about water flowing and how it builds up with a barrier. When you put a concrete dam in that river system, there's sediment that builds up and water and nutrients that build up behind that dam, and it changes that system from a river system to more of a lake-like system. So you have warmer temperatures behind that dam. You have less dissolved oxygen. You have warm water fish species like bass and sunfish, which are fine, but that's not what Vermont trout streams are. That's not what they're known for. So you have a change in ecosystem. And there are consequences of that. You have less thermal refugia for those species that are meant to move up and down. You block passage for aquatic organisms and wildlife. And you can have a nutrient buildup and cyanobacteria blooms. So those are all things that happen when you change a river with a dam. This is I just wanted to show this picture. It's the background of all my slides, but I think it shows the elevation difference and the sediment buildup behind the dam. So this is just like an old timber crib dam in a river that's just built up over time, and it's actually not even impounding that much water. It's impounding sediment, and it's raising the elevation by like 20 feet in this area. So that actually impacts when you have a large storm event. Your river elevation is much higher than it historically was because that sediment can't move downstream. And then I spoke a little bit about this, but project selection is about ecological impact. So where we can we look at all these different variables, and where there is the most benefit is what we're looking at. And so that's from aquatic organism passage, flood mitigation, wetlands restoration, and water quality benefits. We look at the hazard potential rating of the dam. So every dam that's on the Vermont Dam Inventory has a hazard potential rating. And that has nothing to do with the condition of the dam itself. That's a separate thing. But it's, if that dam were to fail, what is it going to impact downstream life and property? That's the hazard rating of the dam. And we can't remove a dam unless we have the interest of the landowner or the support. So there can be a high, highest priority dam removal in the state because of the ecological benefits of it, but we can't touch it if we have a landowner that's not interested. And then obviously the strongest projects are the projects where we have support from the community. And so we really like to start at the community level from the ground up, and we love being engaged in the process from the beginning. And if dam removal doesn't happen, then it doesn't happen, but it's really best to work together on this. And I think we all saw from the 2023 and 24 floods how urgent this is, and my phone has been ringing more than ever, especially right after the 2023 flood, with many communities and landowners who had a dam and they didn't know what to do and they didn't want it anymore, or it failed or breached or something else. So I think if there's any silver lining, which I don't know that there is, but it is, people are understanding rivers a little bit more and how they function, and connecting the dots of how a dam impacts a river system. And I'd love to say that dam removal is a simple 10-step process. It's not simple. It takes years and years and partnership building, but we can kind of break it down to 10 simple steps, and these are the steps: project selection, develop support, fundraising, design, permitting, outreach, removal, restoration, monitoring, and time. And many of those steps, we're going back to them again and again, and I think Kasha can speak to that the best in the next slides. So I'll pass it over.
All right, so as I mentioned, I'm with Vermont River Conservancy. We are in the middle of the design phase of, so if you look at these 10 steps here, we're going to be going back and forth, just like Karina said. And so we're in the design phase looking at the potential removal of 4 dams in and upstream of Montpelier, which I know you all may say, oh, Montpelier is the capital. Nobody wants to hear about Montpelier. But I hope that there are some things that we've gone through. We've gone through floods as well, obviously, and some of the things that we are experiencing that you may see some parallels with your community as well. So these are the 4 dams. The State House is in the upper left corner of the slide there, and 2 dams are right downtown. The most obvious is the Shaw's Dam. If you all have been to the Shaw's grocery store in downtown Montpelier, it's quite visible right behind the store there. And then the other 2, Pioneer and Hidden, are upstream. I'm going to mostly talk about the Shaw's Dam tonight because it is visible, and use that as a little bit of a single story. So that's where the Shaw's Dam is, right in downtown Montpelier, where the North Branch River comes into the main Winooski. And I think of that area as the epicenter for, in Montpelier, our experience with the floods in 2023. So the North Branch River came in very full with lots of rain. It usually just blends in with the Winooski and continues on its merry way downstream. But the Winooski River was quite full and essentially hit a wall of water, and then the water backed up into downtown Montpelier. And so I'm going to share a little bit of the history of this dam, which it's similar to the history of dams all over Vermont and all over New England. But here's a picture of the dam. We're in this picture upstream looking downstream. So I'm circling the area of the dam. Underneath that bridge there, it basically hits a wall and the water goes over. So that's 1897. You can see where Shaw's is currently. And then here's the same dam on the looking upstream on the other side of the river, where there's a gas station now, a couple gas stations, and there were all these factories. And it's kind of hard to imagine now. Right now there's also concrete, there's roads, there's gas stations, but those factories were looking for power. And so they were looking to use the power of the rivers to power their factories. And as we've experienced recently, sometimes our rivers are a little more powerful than we would like. So here's Montpelier in 1927. This was a huge year for flooding in Vermont and also nationally. Like all of the Mississippi Basin flooded in 1927. Whole bunch of towns all over New England flooded in 1927. You'll also think of this year as like the Roaring '20s, headed up to the Great Depression, and we all know the story to come. But this image is really kind of familiar looking. It almost could be from just a couple years ago. So after 1927, people similar to yourselves sat around in rooms and said, we can't have our community looking like this. We can't have our rivers flood. What the heck are we going to do about it? And the Civilian Conservation Corps came to Montpelier and they made an upgrade. So the dam that you saw earlier was a log crib dam. And here we have you can see where Shaw's currently is. Again, there's like a building upgrade from the last 50 years. And the dam, they put in these floodgates, and they made a really big dam that you can almost not really imagine anymore in downtown Montpelier in that spot. And then they discovered something, which is that the dam was actually making the community more vulnerable to flooding, and maybe wasn't such a great idea. The Civilian Conservation Corps or Army Corps of Engineers came in the 70s, and they helped the town to take off the floodgates. And so they took off, you can see where the water is going over the dam, and those floodgates on top, they took off that cement on top. And you can see on the left side of the picture where there's that cement coming down on the edge of the photo. I circled that because you can still see that today, and it shows up in some of the pictures in a little bit. So that was in the 1970s. And then there was the 1990s. And this is Montpelier in the 1990s. 1992, there was an ice jam on the river. And one of my coworkers was in elementary school, middle school in Montpelier, and really remembers really vividly the library was flooded, Bear Pond Books was flooded, Onion River Outdoors was flooded, all the same businesses that flooded just a couple years ago, some of them in the same exact place, were flooded in 1992. And so people were starting to ask, again, what do we do about these floods? Here's a picture of the same dam. I circled the cement edge where you can see that used to be the really tall floodgates that still exists. And so this is the dam in 2022. And then here, of course, we are in 2023. And I don't mean to cause any PTSD because I know we all experience that seeing photos like this. But we all know the realities of photos like this and what it means, not just to have high water, but what it means for our people and our communities and families and just life. And so people in Montpelier, in the wake of the 2023 floods, got together and said, what do we do about this? We had a series, maybe kind of like you all are having now with Ripple Effect, of community conversations The photo in the middle that looks like it's in the State House, it is in the State House. That's not the legislators telling us what to do. That's like one of the only meeting areas that was not flooded in the whole town that could actually hold people. So we took over the Capitol building and went into breakout rooms in the legislative session and in the chambers, and like took over the chambers for conversations about flood resilience. We did DOT exercises. Maybe you've done some of those in your community as well. And from those exercises, people just started to ask, what are these dams and what would happen if we take them out? Fortunately, our organization 2 years earlier had already started to think, hey, maybe we could take out these dams, let's look into it. We had already applied for funding for feasibility studies for engineers to come in and answer some of the questions about what removing a dam might look like. And so we were basically just about to hire contractors, and then Montpelier flooded, and then we hired contractors, and then the community said, hey, can we take out these dams? And we were like, things are underway. Let's see what we learn, and then let's get back together as a community and see what we want to do here. So, the feasibility studies are conducted by an engineer, also soil scientists, et cetera, et cetera. These are the technical experts that help us figure out how would this happen and what do we need to know. And so some of the things that they're looking at is the soil, the sediment. I think Roy Schiff came a couple weeks ago and talked to all of you. He's one of the engineers that we're contracting with on this project, and he always says dam removal is sediment removal. It's sediment management. What you're doing is managing the soil that's behind the dam is the number one thing you're thinking about when you're trying to figure out the design. So how much soil is there behind a dam? What is in that soil? Is it contaminated? Is it clean soil? Can you just pick it up and put it on the side of the river? Could you let some of it downstream? Does it have to be trucked off to faraway states because it's so contaminated it has to go to a special dump? If you were to take that soil out of the river, how would you get it out? Would you put it on train cars? Would you put it on trucks? How would you move that sediment? How would equipment access the river? So in order to get the dam out, you have to get equipment in. So where could you stage the equipment? What would be the path to get that equipment into the river? Who owns the dam? Which may seem like kind of an obvious, like, duh, like obviously somebody owns it, but like this is a very common question I have learned, is that there are a lot of dams that either the dam owner doesn't have any idea they own the dam, or there's this confusion of like, wait, I thought I owned the dam, but now you say you own the dam. Who does this belong to, and who needs to be part of the conversation? So that's part of the research that they do, is figuring out who actually owns the dam. The hydrology studies of looking at the slope of the river, what are the water flows throughout the year, what's the lowest water flows, what's the highest, which can inform how the dam comes out, and what time of year. And one of the most popular questions is, how much is this going to cost? And the engineers work on all of these questions. And where we are right now, they're now coming back to us with reports of, here's what we're finding for these 4 dams. I think these are kind of the technical things that they're figuring out. But I think what I'm most excited about are these other questions that ask, what will the river be like when the dam comes out? And so will it help with flood resilience? We talk about that as a value. How much will it help with flood resilience? Will it drop the lake in Montpelier by 6 inches or a foot or 5 feet? What does that look like for flood resilience? Will there be new recreation opportunities? We're looking at, you laugh, but we're looking at a wave. This is a kid on a paddleboard, and there are rivers in the West where there are waves downtown that for 9 months of the year you can surf downtown, you can paddleboard downtown, you can boogie board, and it draws people by the thousands, literally, like into small communities. So are there new opportunities for recreation and community well-being? What will it mean for wildlife? This is a picture of a snapping turtle on top of the Bailey Dam that I took in June. I think she was trying to get out the river to lay her eggs, and the poor gal couldn't get out of the river. And so here she is on top of the dam trying to get out. Some visuals. So these thinking about the befores and afters and modeling what are the images of what removing the dam might look like, what's the bedrock underneath, and what's that mean for what the river will look like afterwards. And those all things are collectively are the why. And so we can sit around before those studies and say, oh, I think it's going to be good for flood resilience. I think it's going to be good for wildlife. But we don't really know until we're doing the studies. And once we have the why, where we are now is going back to the fundraising with that why and going back to the community outreach and saying, here's what we learned. Is this something we want to move forward with together? So I'm going to kick it to Karina.
So good. Okay, so now I'm just going to take you through some dam removals that I've done. So this is just different case studies of different projects that I've done over the years. So you can see some pictures and we can just talk about different ones. This is Dunkley Pond Dam on Tenny Brook in the city of Rutland. And this we took out in 2021. Prior to this dam removal, the fire department had to evacuate 3 multifamily homes that were adjacent this dam 8 different times in flood events. So the fire department was like, we need this dam out. And in fact, in 2019, there was a Halloween storm in 2019. I don't know if folks remember that. I know I live in Jericho. The power was out for a week, which is the longest it's been out since in the 20 years I've lived in Jericho. In that storm, they actually had to breach the dam, do a partial breach, and evacuate. And after that, they were like, we need this dam out. And so we removed the dam and reconnected the floodplain. The picture on the right just shows the new floodplain, which historically was an impoundment. It was underwater. And then the picture on the left is just a historic sign that often with these projects, historic preservation is a big part of this, and we do a lot of due diligence with the historic piece. And often a requirement, or even not a requirement, but a choice, is to put up a sign next to the dam. So this is right on Route 7. If you're traveling Route 7 through Rutland, you can see the sign on the left and learn about it. But it tells the story of why we are where we are now with this river. And basically, there was a huge attachment to the dam itself. The dam had been a wood mill, turning mill. It had made dowels for broom handles. It had been a tannery. It had been an ice pond where they harvested ice. It had been a swimming hole and a hockey rink. So the city of Rutland had seen this dam through many different iterations. But also, the tribe, the federally recognized tribe in the southern portion of the state weighed in, and they said that they had used this dam for thousands of years the river, to move up and down the river for food and sustenance and travel. And so that was part of the story in the sign. So not the history just of, European colonization, but the history before and thinking about the river before the dam was there. And then because of all of these flood hazards, this dam was prioritized and we removed it in 2021. Pelletier Dam, this is a dam that was owned by Vermont Fish and Wildlife Department. They purchased it in the 1930s, I believe. Before that, it had been a marble mill dam. It was made out of marble. It was a beautiful marble dam. It had been an ice pond, but Vermont Fish and Wildlife had purchased it to make it a trout pond. Unfortunately, when it's not an active mill, you're not managing the sediment buildup that builds up behind that impoundment, because you're just having it as a pond. So it filled up with sediment. It was not a trout pond. It was a big wetland, sediment-filled wetland. But it turns out that North Breton Brook, this brook right below the dam, was an amazing trout fishery. So taking out this dam reconnected 37 miles of brook trout habitat, and Vermont Fish and Wildlife supported that, and it was a great project. We could see the brook trout moving up the river. This is a headwater stream up in Shrewsbury, Vermont, so high up above Rutland. And I'll just say that so these are projects that I've managed. I tend to work on dam removals where there isn't a watershed organization or a community that has someone with the capacity to do the work. So I take on those orphan dams where no one else is. But it's ideal when there are local organizations and watershed groups that can support that work in the communities that they're in. So I'll just note that there aren't enough watershed organizations in the state. The Winooski has a good one. We have conservation districts working hard up here, but there isn't a watershed organization for the Lamoille. There isn't one for the Otter Creek. There isn't, so that's just something that I've noticed as I've done this work. We could use more support for these organizations. But this is a headwater stream up in Shrewsbury, and this was a earthen dam that was put in the 60s, and actually NRCS used to pay landowners to put these dams in for agricultural and fire ponds. This is like a 200-foot long earthen dam, and you can't really see it, but it's because trees grew on the top, but you can see the outlet where the river's flowing. So we had to, this is right above a state road, Northam Road, and if this dam was failing because the trees were growing on the dam, which isn't a good idea if you're going to own a dam, you don't let the trees grow on it, and it was going to impact a house and the road downstream. So we had to do an emergency drawdown where we actually drew all the water out of the dam with the bypass flow and then took the dam out. But this is just after the drawdown. We hadn't even taken the dam out. And what I love about this picture is you can see the springs, so that vertical connection, that groundwater coming into the surface water. So this is a headwater tributary up high, and all these wetland spring seeps are coming into that stream. And normally that had been underwater for the past 40, 50 years and warming up, and now it's actually flowing into the Mill River and ultimately Otter Creek. This is a dam I removed last year in Salisbury on the way to Lake Dunmore Road. And similar story to the others, it's a small dam. It was in terrible shape when we found it, but it had a large impoundment and a huge floodplain wetland restoration project with this one, which was really exciting. And again, a huge story of like the different iterations of this sawmill. It was used as a creamery, it was used as a trout pond, it was a blacksmith shop, and it's actually right below the Salisbury Fish Hatchery, if anyone's familiar with the area. And that tributary that this is on is impaired due to the fish hatchery. So the fish effluent is impacting the stream, and then this dam below the stream that had been abandoned was actually exacerbating that impairment to the tributary because the water's being held back. So we removed the dam, and I think there's also plans to, that fish hatchery is in discussion of whether they're going to maintain it or not, because it does have some pollutant issues. This is a dam I removed this summer on the Breadloaf campus of Middlebury College up in Ripton, so another headwater stream. This is a big concrete dam. I think it was like 60 feet high, and it was built by Middlebury College in the 1930s for the water supply for the Breadloaf campus. So it was providing water for the campus. It was abandoned in the 1960s because they built a more efficient form of water supply downstream. They were still pulling water out of it for snowmaking for the Rickert Nordic Center, but they didn't need that. They needed a more efficient form of snowmaking. So in this process, we helped the college identify a lower down location for their snowmaking water intake and put in like a little seasonal rock weir and take out this massive dam and reconnect this headwater to the Otter Creek. And then lastly, this one's still underway right now in West Rutland, and this is another water supply dam. So water supply dams are a theme this year for whatever reason. I think there's like 5 or 6 water supply dam removals. But a lot of water supply dams have been abandoned because they've been able to find more efficient forms of water supply, and then they were not taken out of the river. So we're taking this one out, and this one actually did cause flooding for the community of West Rutland a number of times. So the landowners were super excited to get it out, as was the community. And then Cross Brothers Dam in Northfield, next to the Dollar General in Northfield, if you're familiar, on the Dog River, which is also a nice brook trout fishery. This one has been in the works probably one of the longest of all of them, and it's stuck in the FEMA I don't know what. It's funding loop. Yeah, merry-go-round. But what's really exciting about, so this shows a before and after. We had a rendering done for the community. This is something that can be helpful for visualizing what the dam's going to look like when there is no, what the river's going to look like without the dam. But the engineering studies show that taking out this dam will lower the flood elevation for 10 homes by 2 feet. So taking 10 homes out of the floodway, which is pretty substantial for the community of Northfield. So this is an exciting project, hence the FEMA funding, which hopefully it will move forward eventually.
So we're just about to the end here. I wanted to play a short little film that a Montpelier High School student made with us. She just graduated in the spring, finished her senior year. And she was involved, she was showing up to city council meetings to talk about dams, talking about possibilities for the river, and has this amazing skill. And so along with some other actually Middlebury students we were working with, they made the script and she made the visuals to talk about the Bailey Dam I was just talking about. And I think her perspective is really great in this little film. So let's see if we can get this to play. Oh. How do I
make it louder?
Oh, let it go all the way to the end.
I think that might be as loud as it goes.
Can I do this?
That's a good idea.
I think that might be just
For the
yeah.
okay.
Hold on. That's as loud as it goes.
Okay, let's try this again. Oops.
I've lived in Montpelier my whole life. I love our town, and I love the amazing rivers flowing right through the middle of it. But until our whole town flooded a couple years ago, it was pretty easy to forget about the rivers altogether. When our town did flood, this weird thing happened. Headlines said, Wrightsville Dam saves the day. But at community forums, people were saying, we need to take out dams to limit flooding. That was confusing to me. Turns out, there are different kinds of dams. Wrightsville Dam has one job, flood control, and it's pretty good at it. It's basically a giant bowl, and most of the time the water is way down towards the bottom of the bowl. When we get lots of rain, the bowl fills up and keeps floodwater out of downtown. But most dams in Vermont were built for a very different job, power. In the mid-1800s, Montpelier was home to woolen mills, brickyards, blacksmith shops, shoe shops, granite quarries, sawmills, a stove shop, and more. They all needed power, and the rivers were an easy answer. Now, how do you control how much power you get from a river? Dams. And in Vermont, we did this a lot. So why does it matter today? Vermont has more than 2,000 old dams. Most aren't in great shape or serving their original purpose anymore, and most make floods worse. Let's take a closer look at one of the most visible dams in town, the one I've always called the Shaw's Dam. It's actually called the Bailey Dam because it was next to the old Bailey grist mill. You know the story. The factory needs power, so the factory dams the river. This was 150 years ago, when the easiest way to build a dam was out of logs. Then, a huge flood in 1927 washed out 17 of the town's 24 bridges and killed dozens of people. Back then, folks in Montpelier wanted to figure out how to keep the town from flooding, and fast. Today, we can all relate to this feeling. One bright idea, a bigger dam. Lucky for Montpelier, the Civilian Conservation Corps had plenty of labor to help out, and in just a couple years, they replaced the old log dam with a giant cement dam. Yay! Unlucky for Montpelier, the new dam made floods worse. Wait, what? Let's get into it. For starters, when water is moving, it doesn't freeze very easily. But when water stops and temperature drops, it freezes. A dam is like a giant cement wall. It slows the water, and the water freezes. Anyone who was here for the 1992 flood remembers how an ice jam formed around the dam. Why at the dam specifically? Because the dam stopped the water and let ice build up. The dam made that flood worse. Okay, second, put sand in a jar. Shake it up. When the water is moving, the sand moves with the water. When you put the jar down, the water stops and the sand drops to the bottom. A dam is like a giant cement wall. It slows the water. The sand drops. More water carrying sand flows toward the dam, and that sand drops too. Eventually, you end up with a big pile of sand behind the dam. This makes the water higher all the time, making it that much closer to flowing right into downtown during a flood. This is pretty obvious at the Shaw's Dam. Look down behind the dam and there's just a few inches of water, then dirt. The dam can't hold water because it's busy holding dirt. But if you take out the dirt and take out the dam, water levels drop 5 feet right there next to Shaw's. That means that the next time our rivers flood, they can hold a lot more water before flooding downtown. So here's our choice. We can take this dam out or we can leave it. If we leave the dam, it'll keep the river 5 feet higher than it should be, which is 5 feet closer to flooding. If we take out the dam, it'll drop water levels by 5 feet and help keep all of us safer during the next big flood. In summary, it's important to honor our town's history, but taking out the Bailey Dam is a tangible step that moves us toward a more resilient future. Thanks for watching.
So sweet. So we just wanted to close with one more slide. We really should have just closed with that video because it's so good. I want her to make like a children's book of that because I think it would be good. But yeah, these are some of the dam removal outcomes. I think we've gone over all of this today, but it eliminates expensive ongoing maintenance costs. So these dams, it's like the economics isn't just in the present, it's like thinking about the long-term economics of the site. It removes the liability of the dam for the landowner. It decreases flood risk to keep the community safer, allows rivers to flow into the floodplains and wetlands, so that lateral connectivity. It provides habitat connectivity for increased ecological diversity. So when we're thinking about resilience in our future, we're thinking about all the species and improving diversity as well as flood resilience. It improves water quality for drinking and swimming because we don't have that stagnant water building up behind the dam. And it adds recreation opportunity. We have a connected river, so we have more miles that we can kayak or canoe or paddleboard, maybe surf.
Yeah. Well, that's in fact actually the end. But we'd love to hear from you all and hear some questions. Yeah.
So what's the story of the Hardwick Dam?
I would say I don't know, because the first step in my mind is those feasibility studies to figure out, is it possible, how would it be possible, what would it look like? And so as a community, just investing in the how would this even happen will answer a lot of questions, I think, because I think any of us sitting here could make guesses, but I don't know that we know. And then to me, one of the biggest pieces of any dam removal is the community values piece, and thinking about what do you all envision for the future of your community. And there are values questions of how we use our rivers and how we relate to our rivers. And is the flood resilience what we're most looking for? Are we looking for electricity? Are we looking for keeping things the way they've always been? Do we want to see something change in our communities? And thinking about those things. And I don't think we can answer those questions. Only you as a community can answer those questions.
Yeah, and I can, sorry I was late everyone, I'm Emily Finnegan. I'm the district manager for Caledonia County Natural Resources Conservation District, and we are in fact working on a feasibility study with the engineering firm SLR, and they are working on a Lamoille modeling study that includes Hardwick. And once they finish that modeling, they're going to look into the feasibility. They're basically going to do what Kasha described, which is a feasibility study of what would it look like to remove the Hardwick Dam. And that timing has been pushed a little bit further than I would wish, but there will be a lot of opportunities for the community to learn about that feasibility study and provide input. Because again, as both of them mentioned, if people don't want to take out the dam, we can't take it out.
And just
Is that study funded?
Yep.
A quick question. Oh darn, I forgot it. But I have other
Can I just add one thing to that? And I think it's just, I would challenge you all to think about how, Kasha said, keep things how they've always been. I would challenge you all to think about how they've always been for us, or for the history of the river, it's long, the history is longer than our time here. And so I think that's part of this conversation.
Quick question on the dams that you have removed already. Did it change the water tables in the area? Because we're in drought. I think it's our new normal. And it's nice to have a water source available for emergencies, emergency power if the grid went down, fire trucks, whatever. But my question is, normally, the way I see things, it rains the same on both sides of the dam. And if you ask Wolcott, they don't, they flood. The whole thing all the way down floods. How does this help that? How does this help the other side of the dam, where it's flooding anyway because of the rain events we're having?
So there's another dam downstream of this
Right.
dam. So the problem continues down the Lamoille. I'll say that as far as and I definitely don't have any of the flood inundation studies available. So I really can't speak to this river, so I can't tell you that. I can tell you that, definitely thinking about wells and that piece is part of the feasibility study, and that's something that comes up.
There was dams there originally, and has the water table changed where you removed the dams for the better?
Sorry, in those
I can
projects.
everybody, don't feel bad.
Yeah, no, so no one has had well issues for any of the projects we've had, and that has been something we've looked into in some of these projects. And the water table has been lowered to the historic elevation of the stream. So with these dam removals, and this isn't something we got into details, the engineers do borings, so they actually figure out where the old river channel was, and they can find the substrate change and figure that out. And so that helps them calculate how much of the sediment to remove or let flush downstream if that's the case, because that sediment is good if we can, it does it builds our floodplains, it provides nutrients downstream, it feeds our farm fields. It's good in a way if we can let that, but sometimes there's infrastructure in the way, so we don't always let the sediment go. But so we figure out where the historic elevation of the channel was, and we basically, the goal is to restore the channel to that elevation. And in doing that, yes, it lowers the flood elevation in most cases, but it doesn't make the river dry up. The river's still flowing. The same flows are in the river that were there before. They're just 5 feet lower. So,
On both sides.
Yes,
sides
on
of
both
the beaver
sides.
dams.
Yeah.
And, you know, a lot of these projects, the dam, we're talking about dams, but oftentimes they're happening in tandem with other projects. And so one of the things, I just put up this photo again of like the restored wetlands, is that like the wetlands store a lot of water, and it doesn't change the water table in terms of the groundwater. And so the restored area that comes afterwards can actually hold quite a lot of water in different, it's not visible to the eye. It's not like we look at it and see a reservoir, but there's water stored in those soils. And then I don't know if our map of our dams, how far back I have to go, but the Pioneer Dam, which is up the river here, that's a project that is up for implementation grant funding right now, in combination with a floodplain restoration where the Stevens branch, which I guess is kind of hidden, comes in here. So right here. So there's right here is a city-owned property where they're planning a floodplain restoration. It's bermed up and the river can't access. It's right where the main Winooski River coming down here, the Stevens branch is this windy river here. This used to be a giant wetland floodplain, and it's not anymore. And so these projects are actually being proposed together because neither one of them has as great a benefit as doing them both together. So, and this is water storage. When that can convert back into a wetland, that's groundwater, and those are that's the drought resilience also.
But can you access groundwater if it's in the ground? You know what I'm saying? Like fire trucks, say. Sometimes fire trucks use the river to fill up.
Yeah, I think it would depend on your community and how, what the systems are. So
Yeah, but
that's something to
often
look into.
there are grants for when we take out dams to put in a dry hydrant in a location, so we'll like accommodate that so that there is a fire piece. I don't know.
I was just wondering if anyone has studied if the Hardwick, or if and how the Hardwick Dam affects flooding in Hardwick, if it has any correlation with the flooding, like upstream and
Yeah,
Emily?
we'll include that in the feasibility study. That was definitely a question that was brought up as the most important question to answer. So we'll do our best. There's only so much we can say with the amount of money and time that we have, but we'll do our best to give the community enough information to make a decision.
And you've had your, he's had his hand
Okay,
raised
and
for a
then-
while back here, and then you're next.
Yeah.
Did you have a No, not it. Yeah.
Well, I didn't have my hand up for very long.
Oh.
But real quickly, this whole series has been really nice. You start out by saying you have to understand how rivers work, we understand dams and watersheds. So this whole series has been nice in that. Now, last time we talked about beaver dams. And so I may have missed something, but we didn't talk that much about the sediment dynamics system-wide for beaver dams. So in terms of telling folks about how the sediment is the key issue with dams, sometimes I get questions like, well, then we should just take out everything, like including beaver dams. So can you just differentiate a little bit about the dynamics, sediment dynamics of sort of natural obstructions and roughness in beaver dams, et cetera, in the system?
So we love beaver dams. I'll just say that in short. And beaver dams are natural. They're made of wood. They do fail during storm events, and there is like a constant social management conflict with beavers. I'll recognize that. But beaver dams do not block fish passage. They do slow rivers down. In fact, I meant to talk about this, but the Wainwright, the dam removal in Salisbury that I did last year, there was 8 beaver dams upstream of that before the fish hatchery, and we built 8 strategic wood additions, which are basically like human beaver dams below to tie in the elevation, because one concern was there's a lot of fine sediment in this channel. When you have like a slow moving river, people love to build dams on bedrock where the river, is flat. It's moving slowly. That's a perfect place. And then there's bedrock below. It's a perfect place to just like impound and create a lake. So the state was very concerned about that sediment releasing over time to this impaired stream that's impaired because of the fish effluent. So what we did was build 8 strategic wood additions that tied into the natural beaver dams upstream to slow that sediment, capture some of that sediment so it's not all going downstream. And it's been amazing to watch the beavers take over and build on top of these dams. So the beavers have worked right alongside us for a lot of our projects, and we'll sometimes divert water so that the excavators can get in the river. The beavers will build onto the sandbags that we've diverted the water overnight. So like we're working the day shift, they're working the night shift. And then we come back, it's amazing to see. So.
If I can summarize that beaver dam, like that's a sort of distributed sediment attenuation and slowing down for accumulation, and like dams are just trying to put that all in one place, and it's more of a problem.
And I'm not
smaller amounts.
I'm not a scientist here, so you all can do the research on this. But my understanding is that beaver dams, in fact, replenish the groundwater and much more efficiently than a straight up dam does because of the sediment and hydrology and everything else. So when we're talking about drought and water, beaver dams and the wetlands that they create are in fact really fantastic drought resilience tools, in a way that a human-made dam out of concrete is not going to have the same kind of impact. So there's multiple benefits to that. Thanks. And then you were next.
Yeah. So the trout, let's say, or any fish can go underneath the beaver dam. Is that
correct?
The idea?
Yeah. Okay.
The other thing, there actually is an organization, Watershed organization, up in the Upper Lamoille, and so. It started initially to deal with the lake in Caspian specifically, and then it broadened out to other either river systems or ponds or lakes like Eligo that are also within Greensboro. And then the offshoot of that, after about, I guess, 4 years, 3 maybe, was this Streamwise, which is part of Lake Champlain Basin program. And we've had a good effect on doing plantings in specific areas, East Hardwick, Greensboro Bend, and some of the tributaries coming into Caspian. So, but we have a very limited amount of people working on it, and we have a bunch of volunteers. I mean, most of us are volunteers. And so we can't really address things like dams and stuff like that.
No, and tell the name of your organization so that.
So it's Stewards of the Greensboro Watershed is the larger organization which deals with like lake-wise, stream-wise, the recertification of the lake, in this case Caspian, a study of the lake, in terms of roads and tributaries. And how much phosphorus is coming into the lake and that type of thing. And then Streamwise is just part of this, which is sort of, I guess the parent organization is the Greensboro Association, but Streamwise is directly connected to Lake Champlain Basin program. So and that we tried to, do more work, I think, at least as much work on the Upper Lamoille, and to some degree going down, I guess, as far as like Pumpkin Lane in East Hardwick. So that's kind of where we're at.
That's great. Thank you.
Sure.
That's important.
Well, I don't know if we're leaving you all with more questions than answers, but the nature of dam removal is that there are a lot of questions to answer in order to get there. So I'm sure more of you have questions, and I'm glad to stick around. We're glad to stick around and answer questions one-on-one. It's a little after 7 and want to... We have to 7:30. Oh, great.
We're here for
here. I accidentally stopped this. Does somebody know how to make it go again? If it doesn't matter. Yeah.
Do you ever want to know where there's a ghost dam?
Mm-hmm.
You do?
Yes, in fact, that's like sort of our Halloween thing, so it's coming out. But please report ghost dams to me. I can. Emily has my contact, or Emily, and she can share them. Okay. But we do give them to the state, and then they update the dam inventory.
That'd be great. Thank
What are
you.
ghost dams?
Ghost dams are dams that aren't on the state inventory, so they don't have a state ID number, which any dam that's blocking a river should have a state ID number and be on the dam inventory. That doesn't mean it's necessarily jurisdictional, like that the state has to, check in on it and report it, but it just means that it exists and it's on a map so that we can know that it's there.
And it has to be a complete dam, not the stump of a dam that once was there.
It can be the stump of a dam that once was there. We just need, like, ideally a couple photos and a description of it, and we'll come out and look. But certainly we track those too. Those are called breached, partially breached dams. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, this may be a strange question, but the river is not owned by the landowner, is it? Mm-hmm. The river that.
Yeah, no, the river is a public water body. The river.
The dam is a landowner's responsibility.
Correct.
And they are responsible for the maintenance of these dams that are there.
Yes. And if they were to fail, the impact to downstream landowners.
And so I think that's something to think about. I know, I don't know if your all town experiences this, but I live in Montpelier and I know our town has a real hard time filling potholes. There are potholes all over town. We can't keep our infrastructure we have in great shape. That same challenge of like ongoing maintenance and having to repair and upkeep, it is the same for any kind of physical infrastructure that's owned and managed by your town. So a dam is the same thing, just like a road. If the dam is taken down, maintenance costs are zero because the dam doesn't exist. If the dam is there, then and the town owns it, for example, the town is responsible for repairing the dam, making sure it stays safe. The state issues what I think of essentially as report cards on the condition of the dam. And if you get a low grade on that report card, the town is responsible for improving the dam to ensure its safety. And if a dam should fail, if the town owns the dam, is responsible for the impacts as well. So that's the liability piece. So those are kind of hidden costs, but are important to think of that may not see, today or tomorrow, but long term for any kind of community are also part of the conversation. Yeah.
Your last comment kind of relates to what's going on with the Green River Dam, is that correct?
Kinda.
I don't know. I don't think we need to go there tonight. But I do. Did anyone hear the news about Maine and the Kennebec River? So yesterday, the Nature Conservancy announced the purchase of 3 hydropower dams. I think not all of them were working on the Kennebec River in Maine, and their planned removal over the long term, which allows spawning for Atlantic salmon all the way to the Sandy River, which is the most important tributary on the Kennebec for Atlantic salmon. But it's like a huge deal in the dam removal news dam world, so you should check it out. Really exciting. Emily?
Can you talk a little bit about I think a lot of what comes up when people think about dams is the ability to generate power and renewable, clean, however you want to describe it, energy. Can you talk a little bit about what considerations there are when looking at dams in Vermont in particular, and then how you think about that, basically, the ability of a dam to generate power versus what it's doing to a river or a flood resilience, or how it impacts flood resilience.
I think we said this earlier, but any dam removal is a values question for the community of what pieces are more valuable, the power generation or the flood resilience or what have you, whatever comes out of the feasibility study in terms of the whys. And so I think that's gonna, it sounds like it's gonna be a key question for this community, is to think about whether having that power is more important than the potential, I would think, flood resilience from removing a dam. Yeah, I think.
And to add to that, so I also provide comments to hydropower relicensing projects across the state. So I definitely follow the hydropower thing as well, and not opposed to hydropower, but I think what you really need to think about is how much that project is generating, because often the amount of power with some of these dams is tiny compared to, you could put up a solar field nearby or a battery bank and create a much greater power. So like encourage in that conversation for Hardwick or whoever, the community, to look at other forms of renewable energy that exist, and whether really the cost that would have to be put into this dam to provide it, what that benefit would be and how that would work compared to the weigh that with the ecological cost, because there's just so many benefits to think about.
Solar panels are not a recreational opportunity.
Yeah.
As a point of history, the Hardwick Dam was put in place in 1911 to control the flow of the Lamoille so that the Potterville Dam would have a steady flow of water to it. That's the Hardwick Hydro Dam. So far as I know, there was never any power generated at that dam. It was put in to control the flow to the power plant downstream.
And I think it made 10%, which as somebody on a fixed income, I don't mind 10% off my power bill. But yes, you're right.
Yeah.
But that's Potter, not
Right.
Hardwick Lake.
Just out of curiosity, how many people in the room live near a stream, river, or lake that they think might be affected by removal of a dam on it?
Yeah, good question. Questions up front here?
We have a cottage on Shadow Lake, and the dam is in terrible condition, and apparently they've done some sort of a feasibility thing, and so if they allow the water to go through, and if they don't really fix the dam, they will reduce the water so that the lake will be much, much smaller.
They already have.
They have already reduced it.
A good deal,
Yeah.
you know.
And there is going to be much smaller. The cost, I believe the dam is owned by the town of Glover, so they will be responsible for what will happen to both Glover and Barton if the dam goes. On the other
Like
hand,
Runaway Pond is
yeah.
the famous
Yeah.
example
Okay.
over near Glover.
Yeah. But by what I've just heard today, I mean, as far as we're concerned, we want the dam fixed and we want the lake back to where it was. And so, but that's selfish. It sounds to me that's a very selfish attitude to nature. But but economically for the community, the people around the lake pay huge taxes, and they also buy a lot of stuff, and they employ a huge number of people to keep their cottages from falling down.
Right.
And so there's
Yeah.
a big, huge economic aspect to this.
Totally.
Yeah. And it sounds really what we need to do is to bring in as many beavers as possible. to the dam for
Start
free.
farming beavers.
I mean, seriously, I mean, that's a joke, but
Yeah.
seriously, it sounds like
Yeah.
somehow we should do it that way.
And I think, I wish I had the statistic because I've been asked it a lot lately, but many of Vermont's ponds, public ponds, are dammed. And I'm not an advocate of trying to remove all of those dams by any means, but I do think it's important for us to be aware of that choice that we're making, you know, the consequences of our actions, and weigh those benefits.
I can tell you another story, is because I'm from Ireland, and my father was an engineer, and he was involved in what is still known as the Shannon scheme, and the Shannon is the largest river in Ireland, and he, along with all the other young engineers at the time, he brought electricity to all the small communities, and they didn't in the west of Ireland, and they came on their bicycles, and the people came out in droves to meet the young engineers when they were bringing light to the communities, and they gave them bottles of whiskey to drink. Tea and whiskey, yeah.
Jameson, hopefully.
Not while they were designing
That's
it.
right. It still exists, the Shannon scheme.
I'm Select Board Clever, and over in this corner is our town administrator, Teresa, who's been working extensively with the engineers on the Shadow Lake Dam. So speaking to that, and I just pulled up, because this has been a little mind-blowing, I don't think it occurred to any of us that dam removal was even, and I think it's not an option, but it was listed on our engineer's initial sort of alternative study, and I believe, Teresa, correct me if I'm wrong, but ruled out in that it wouldn't pass dam safety program due to the peak discharge from dam removal quadrupling. You know, it would give lots of freeboard and potentially flood resilience downstream, but would affect the discharge, and yes, definitely would affect the lake level, and it already has. You know, the dam safety program mandated lowering the level, which is why, you know, we're gonna have to fix that dam. It didn't even really occur to me, the idea of removal of it, which, you know, very well might be better overall for downstream, for flood resilience, all of that. But you're absolutely right. It would strongly impact the lake, the property owners, the and that's, you know, it's considered a recreational dam. You know, it's not used for power. That's the status that it has. And then, you know, down along it, the Barton River flows out of there.
Sure.
Both me and Teresa have houses right on the Barton River in the village. There's a really big beaver dam right behind my house right now, which is great, or would be great, but unfortunately it is right up against houses, you know, on the edge of the river. So we did get, with Fish and Wildlife's input and permission to remove that, and I'd like, as my next step, to see about what you were talking about, and we talked about in the last meeting about beaver dams, these sort of faux, you know, beaver dams that you hope the beavers will adopt a little bit more downstream, not right next to houses, but in, you know, fields and whatnot, which would be wouldn't threaten infrastructure and whatnot, to try to get that waterway, both the lake itself and the waterway, sort of in a happy equilibrium, because the flooding was, you know, 2023, there was, there's 5 feet of water in my yard. And we have inundation studies for if the dam on Shadow does bust, and it's looking like 5 or 6 feet of water downtown, just like Runaway Pond, you know. Somebody's got to run after the miller's wife. But this is interesting, and I was thrilled to hear at the last meeting that, you know, there's organizations like Northwoods, Trout Unlimited, and it sounds like perhaps you guys as well are involved in sort of trying to work with beavers in better places so that they're not threatening people, you know, their dams threatening floods on people's houses, but in a better watershed area or floodplain area. And is that true? Would your organization be one to reach out to?
So my organization does not. We have worked on these beaver dam analogs as it relates to a dam removal project, so as like a restoration, but we wouldn't be doing that for just like, but I can certainly point you to people that do. Trout Unlimited, Northwood Stewardship Center, there's a lot of folks out there, Vermont Land. Yeah.
And Teresa, did I say anything wrong? Teresa knows way more about all
No,
this.
no, but I would like to bring you some comfort to know that we are soon able to make a decision as far as the analysis goes on the Shadow Lake Dam, and we'll be keeping everybody informed on the lake. I usually tell Jen Andrews, and she sends out a group email. So,
To whom?
You're welcome.
All right,
To
question over
the
here.
association?
Yes.
Can you talk a little about how culverts also affect the dams do?
Culverts.
The splash pool below the
Question for
culvert?
you. Okay. So yeah, culverts can act just like dams, really, and roads. There's so many roads that don't even have culverts across large wetlands. So culverts, roads, and certainly they are maybe less in the public eye. Dams are a little more exciting than culverts, but there's a lot more culverts fragmenting river systems, especially headwater tributaries because of smaller streams. So there's a lot of folks, including the conservation districts and watershed organizations, all working to right-size culverts and think about open bottom culverts and restoring natural stream function. So that's the thing. I hope that like take-home message is that like natural streams function to transport sediment, water, nutrients, organisms up and down those systems. And when you fragment that system, it really impacts the functioning of that system. So statewide, we're thinking about, connecting our forests and connecting our rivers at the watershed scale. So thinking about the whole system and everything that flows in and where it ultimately is going.
And a lot of, I think, culverts, dams, a lot of that is looking at the longitudinal connectivity, but then that lateral connectivity is also really important. And I would say that's where our organization, Vermont River Conservancy, most of our work is not dam removal, but is it focused on the lateral connectivity of protecting the floodplains and forests and wetlands and land along rivers, so that rivers have room and space to meander and re-find their meanders where they've maybe been straightened or bermed up over the time. And like Karina said, as you have attended these talks and maybe begin to see our rivers in different ways, when you're driving around train tracks, roads, people's backyards oftentimes have these artificial berms, or the road is built up next to a river. Any of those things all cut off the lateral connectivity, because our rivers should be meandering through our valleys where we have wide valleys, and they largely don't do that anymore. And so, if you ask a kid to run from here to there, they're going to run really fast in a straight line. And that's what our water does also. It comes faster and more erosive into our towns and our communities. And when you slow down the river, allow those meanders to come back in with lateral connectivity, and you get that when you do dam removal also, because you create those floodplains, the water slows, it drops debris, it drops sediment, and it's not as powerful when it's coming into downtown. So that's most of the work that we do, is focusing on the land along the rivers.
Could you throw that slide one more time with the circle and the
this one?
Yes. Okay.
All right, we have time for maybe one more question. Anyone else?
Let me ask this question. You just talked about the benefits of slowing a river down, and you began the program talking about the dangers of the dam slowing the river down. So there's a delicate balance going on here that I don't know that I've heard you touch on. Can you talk to that?
Yeah, so when your river's coming in and it hits that cement wall and it drops out the sediment, it fills up with sediment directly behind the dam where there should be a river. When our river is going back and forth through the land, it slows down and it's dropping the sediment on the outside curves, and yet the water and some of the sediment is continuing to move downstream slower and, thinking about communities, infrastructure, more safely. And so a dam like you saw in that high school student's video, a dam that's holding sediment is not holding water, it's holding dirt instead. And so the dam is simply artificially elevating the ground.
So you were talking about the temperature of the water downstream for trout.
Yeah.
Could you talk to that point?
So when water stops and fills up a bathtub, which is what a reservoir is, we largely call them lakes, but they're reservoirs. That's the pool that forms behind a dam. And so when water is in a reservoir, in that kind of bathtub, the water on top gets really warm and it stops the water from, and when water is moving and also in a narrower channel, it's going to be more shaded and it's not going to have the opportunity to sit there and really warm up in the sunshine. And some of the dams are top release dams where the water going over the top is of the dam and going downstream is from the top of the reservoir. And anybody who's been swimming, if you go down deep, it's colder at the bottom. So if you take cold water from the headwaters, you stop it in a reservoir, you heat it up, and then take the hottest water and send it downstream, it's not great for fish habitat. Our fish, there can be die-offs and things like that downstream. And then also all of the things that are in the water, like blue-green algae and those types of things that even for like recreation are preventing people from enjoying rivers. Those problems increase when the temperature of the water is higher.
Good job.
Can I just speak to these questions? I think these questions about sediment and movement of water are really good because having been at the Beaver talk, everyone was talking about slowing down water, attenuating sediment. And what we're talking about with dams is like, we don't want the sediment back there. We don't want the water to slow down. So of course, that's confusing. But to me, I've been trying to figure out how I would say it. It's sort of like a matter of scale and dispersal, right? So like the dam, all the water slowing down and dispersed, like putting sediment in one place. When we talk about beavers and beaver dam analogs, we're talking about across the whole landscape, storing a little sediment there and a little sediment there, and like slowing it down in one section and a little bit in another section. So that's the difference between these values that we're talking about.
But aren't the beavers dealing with the sediment behind their dams? Aren't they removing it as it builds up?
They're
maintaining it, right?
Yeah, they're messing with it.
Okay, so it's not like...
But it does, beaver dams do attenuate sediment, as well as beaver dams. But it's more dispersed than a concrete dam. It's kind of, that's the difference, right?
Still allowed to go through, just like the fish can go through. Some
Sediment can go through
also
too.
go through.
Yeah, sediment can pass.
Yeah.
Hopefully that's
And it's also the dissolved oxygen. So there's like, when you have flow in a river, you have more bubbles, you have more oxygen. That's good that's what fish like, that's what brook trout like. So that's a big difference than when you stop flow and the water slows down.
It's just kind of natural movement versus just a wall.
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.